something that I'm not giving you, let me know, because I'm just the fill-in for today. I'm happy to be here to spoke in my class. I'm a professor at the business school here, and I teach energy and sustainability, sustainable development topics at the business school. And so Dirk came to my class. I'm sure you've heard his story of growth and the distorted nature of GDP. So that was a pretty interesting discussion to have in the business school, where all of their other courses kind of take that as the gospel truth. So he was a bomb thrower in my class. I don't think I'll be as much of a bomb thrower in this class, but I don't know. Maybe some of this will be controversial to you. I had a chance to let some folks know kind of what my background is before I came to Duke. I have a pretty diverse background in liberal arts and in international studies, mostly in South Asia. I spent most of my 20s working around the Himalayas. I spent another decade working in the private sector, mostly with Coca-Cola. And that's the case study I'm going to share with you today, is the work that I did on water issues at Coca-Cola. And then I've been here at Duke for about the last 8 years. So before I jump in, I'd love to hear kind of who you guys are, where you come from. So maybe just do a quick round of introductions, just so I know kind of the name and school and what you're interested in, so I can kind of calibrate the message to who I'm speaking with. So.
My name's Haley. I'm a senior. I'm studying political science. Where I'm from.
Where do you want to work? What do you want to do when you get done? I guess you're on the cusp of that.
Yeah, that's
figure that out.
That's
What are your career goals?
That's the
Yes, yes, this is an interview.
Um,
We'll all grow.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't really have any direct plan, but ideally, as of now, I'd love to get involved in the UN's environmental program, or actually, after this class, another class I've taken, see if I can get involved in sustainability.
Delaney, I'm a senior, also going to do political science, with also not a huge idea what I might do next year, but potentially something with journalism.
Okay.
Caitlin, also a senior. I'm majoring in environmental policy, and I'm studying a lot of for like international law.
I'm Matthew, senior, environmental science and philosophy, and I think I would like to do something with environmental education, or spreading more.
Are there many environment philosophy majors here? That's an interesting combination.
Not a lot of top of my head.
But
I was going to major in philosophy, but that should have worked.
Good. I had an undergrad degree in philosophy as well.
Hi, I'm James. I'm a public policy major, and I would like to do something.
Okay. Good. Clear enough.
I'm Jimmy. I'm studying biology and public policy. Also not really sure which I do yet. Maybe something healthcare related, but still figuring that out.
Yeah, I'm Justin. I'm studying public policy and information science, and I'm looking in like policy space, foreign policy stuff.
Big game stuff, huh?
Yeah, definitely.
My name's Coleman, studying economics and religion, and I'm
Okay. Yeah.
I'm Courtney. I'm a senior. I'm an environmental science major, and actually running a sustainable food company, so hopefully I can help. So,
Yeah. Awesome. What's it called?
what?
What's it called?
Ungraded produce.
Okay. Oh, I just read about that.
Yeah, we got our first order last week.
Yeah. Where was that in Rochester?
Yeah, Rochester.
Cool.
I'm Lauren. I'm majoring in political science, and I want to go to law school eventually.
Okay.
I'm Tori. I'm a senior. I'm majoring
say are they addicts?
Battlestar
Or
Galactica.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Cool. That sounds fun.
I'm Kyle. I'm a senior studying public policy and economics. I think I want to go to education policy.
Jay, I'm studying environmental science. I'm a sophomore. I'm studying environmental science and political science, and I'm going to environmental.
Okay.
I'm Jack. I'm a senior studying environmental science and philosophy. I think I want to do like environmental wellness history.
The next being Jurgen, that kind of stuff. Good. So, I have a presentation, but if we get distracted on other things, I'm happy to let the presentation go and just have a conversation. Dirk's not here, he can't weigh in, so we can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. So we've got about an hour or so. I wanted to give you a little bit of a story about how I got interested in water issues and in the private sector, and then developed a kind of strategy for the Coca-Cola company that I was working for at the time to take a different approach to water issues. So I'm not sure, does Dirk usually sit? Is this
Yeah, I think so.
like?
Yeah.
This is
I don't think you ever
Whatever you want to do.
Okay. No, this is fine for me. I just wanted to not be breaking the code here. So, so some of you are familiar with the World Economic Forum, the big Davos meeting that happens every year. All the muckety-mucks that meet. I've never been able to go. I've prepped people to go to Davos, prepared their briefing documents, but wasn't able to go myself. They run a survey every year called the Global Risk Report, and what they do is they have a network of 750 experts from around the world who are in touch with kind of changing market conditions wherever business operates, anywhere in the world, and tries to prioritize and evaluate what are the big issues that are emerging, and one, how likely are those issues to create real impacts on business, and number two, if they do, what's the likely scale of the issue? So how much would it actually impact their bottom line or their ability to operate? So they update this every year. It's an interesting read. And the 2016 evaluation, they identified these issues as being the most likely kind of issues for companies and for the public sector as well. Things like large-scale voluntary involuntary migration, extreme weather events, failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation. So these are the kind of issues that are top of mind and quite likely in the estimation of the 750-person panel. And water issues are here as well at number 9. And it's a long, long list. So top 10 are the ones that have been prioritized as being pretty important issues. In addition, they evaluate which ones have the potential to have the biggest impact, the biggest disruptive impact. And on that list, water comes in at number 3 behind failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation and weapons of mass destruction. So crises around these issues could have real geopolitical kind of consequences. So water issues have been moving up the kind of the list of priorities. It used to be kind of a taken for granted, except for in local situations there may be drought or constraints on water issues or water quality issues. But I think increasingly there's a recognition that water issues are systemic, that the gap between demand and supply is great, that climate change is having an enormous impact on water issues. So I think there's growing recognition that this thing that we took for granted is actually quite in question as we look out over the next coming decades. So I wanted to give just a little bit of primer for those of you who are environmental students. I'm sure none of this is new, but just to give a little context. From one perspective, water is abundant. This is a shot from a satellite. At one angle, looking down on Earth, essentially the entire planet looks like it's water covered over the Pacific, depending on how the planet is shifting at the time. So there is an enormous amount of water on the planet. And so what's the problem? Well, the problem is that most of that water is in oceans, so it's salt water and not available for a lot of the things that we want to use it for. So about 97.5% of that water is in the oceans. 2.5% of the total water on the planet is fresh water. Of that, 2.5% 2/3 of the water is in glaciers. Another almost third of it's in groundwater. Just a little bit in permafrost. And 0.4% that's actually surface water or in the atmosphere. So from that very large kind of apparent abundance, we actually have a pretty small piece of that, which is fresh water that's available at the surface. And of that, about 2/3 of that again is in freshwater lakes. The other distributed in the atmosphere, in soil moisture, in rivers, wetlands, vegetation. So when we think about it, we think about lakes, rivers as being kind of where the water is. As a portion of the total water available, it's actually a pretty small portion that's there. So what looks abundant is actually a lot less abundant than what you might think. Just one other point. So human use of water, about 70% of it is used in agriculture. So over 2/3 of the total water that's available is used in agriculture, 22% used by industry, and the remaining used for domestic use. So again, agriculture is a major player here in terms of impacts on water resources. Water is an interesting resource in that it's renewable, infinitely renewable, theoretically, because it's part of a closed system. So there's not more or less water than there was, millions of years ago on the planet, but it circulates in a system where, it forms in rain clouds, it rains down, it infiltrates into the groundwater, that sometimes is extracted or moves into other bodies of water. It's used, it's consumed, it's put on a field, and then it evaporates back into the clouds. So it's constantly cycling through this system. So we aren't creating or destroying water, that's not really possible, but we're intervening in this closed system in ways that are either, positive and support the kind of renewable and the renewability and the value of water resources, or we're intervening to make it, lower quality, polluted, which essentially takes it out of commission. It's still there, but it's now polluted and has a load that's difficult to, take the pollution out of it. So water's a closed system, which makes it different than a typical depletable, non-renewable resource. And what got me interested in water is that water is fundamental to everything we care about. So I don't think about water as primarily an environmental issue. Water is critical to ecosystems, so in that sense it's an environmental issue, but it's also critical to our food supply. Remember, 70% of our water is being used in agriculture. It's critical to public health. Almost 1 billion people who don't have access to clean water. And about half of the beds in the world, hospital beds in the world, are people who have waterborne illness. So enormous public health burden that comes from clean water. Really should think about water and sanitation together, because lack of sanitation facilities will pollute water resources and create disease vectors that wouldn't happen otherwise. So even if you have access to clean water, if you don't have adequate sanitation, you're often polluting those sources of water and continuing the health problems that come with it. So it has an enormous public health impact. It's a huge issue if you care about things like women's rights, because in most places in the world, women are the ones that procure water. They're the ones who go to the well and fill their buckets and carry it back to their home. You go in many parts of Asia or Africa or Latin America where they don't have pumped water, it's a women's responsibility. And so it has enormous impacts on quality of life and on women's rights. And so, and I'm trained as an anthropologist, so water is also fascinating because it's like so fundamental to every history and culture around the world. The symbolic importance of water, from baptism to the River Ganges. So it's part of our culture, almost in a way that we can't even sort of get outside it and see it for what it is. It's so much a take it for granted part of our everyday lives. So this makes it a really interesting issue for me, in that you have to think about this not just as a resource issue or a renewable resource issue, but really thinking about it in all of those dimensions. And I think that's actually the key to the kind of approach we eventually adopted. So water availability is the area we spent most of the time thinking about this. You can think about water quantity or water quality. Those kind of the two sides of the coin. This is mostly about water quantity. So how much water is available? Renewable water supply. So this is a map of renewable water supply available per capita. So this is what comes in, in the rains, it's available in the lakes and rivers and so forth. So in 1975, you have a map that looks like this, where you read the kind of the oranges and the yellows being the areas that are relatively more water stressed or water scarce. The light green being sort of mid-range, and then the light blue and dark blue being of abundance or surplus of water that's available. So this is 1975. You can project to 2000 and see how the map changes. So notice the change in colors from 1975 to 2000. And because this is based on per capita, you can project population and say what's it going to look like in 2025. So again, what do you notice? Pretty straightforward. How did the map change from 75 to 2025?
Becomes more spicy.
Yeah, so what was a fairly regional issue in the Middle East and parts of Africa spreads out. Areas that were in surplus go to abundance or to adequacy. So in general, an issue that was local becoming increasingly global. But you go out to 2025, say, yeah, that's an issue that you probably should be concerned about. But what's the problem with a map like this? This is from the UN. Yeah.
It doesn't showcase the fact of like where there's currently in like the most population growth is the areas where there is stress, but it really doesn't show as the common thing.
Yeah, so you have this convergence of greatest population growth happening in areas that are most water scarce. So you don't see necessarily the tensions there. That's